Siberia, the eastern part of Russia. A vast land stretching from the Ural Mountains to the Pacific Ocean, with an area of more than 5 million square miles. Siberia is larger than the United States and all of Europe combined. For most of the world, this is the coldest place on Earth. Synonymous with endless forests and icy emptiness. Siberia contains lakes so deep that they hold up to 1/5 of the Earth's fresh water. Snow-covered mountains, high mountain grasslands, smoking volcanoes, and hissing hot springs. Remote islands surrounded by the violent waves of the Pacific Ocean. And glaciers sparkling under the sunlight. Another remarkable thing is that despite the harsh conditions, people still live here. Indigenous hunters, nomadic reindeer herders. And the largest city among them is Yakutsk, the capital of the Sakha Republic. The largest city in the world, built on continuous permafrost. In winter, when temperatures drop to -58 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, Yakutsk disappears beneath what locals call ice fog. This is not ordinary fog. It is a thick, hazy layer created when moisture from car exhaust and human breath freezes instantly in the still air. The city vanishes. Visibility is reduced to just a few steps. You are walking through a cloud of ice that exists because the air itself cannot hold moisture at this temperature. To survive, engineers raise every building on deep concrete piles, drilled into the frozen ground, leaving a permanent ventilation gap of 1 to 2 meters beneath each structure. That empty space is critical. If snow, debris, or careless construction blocks the airflow, heat from the building seeps downward, thawing the permafrost into waterlogged mud. Entire structures can tilt, crack, or slowly sink. In Yakutsk, architecture is not about comfort or beauty. It is about keeping the ground frozen at all costs. But Yakutsk is not even the coldest inhabited place in Siberia. That title belongs to Oymyakon, a village with fewer than 1,000 residents, where temperatures have been recorded at -96 degrees Fahrenheit. At these extremes, even breathing becomes an event. Exhaled air crystallizes instantly, producing a faint, delicate tinkling sound the locals poetically call the whispering of the stars. Life here demands constant vigilance. Cars are rarely turned off in winter because once an engine stops, the oil and fuel can freeze solid, sometimes beyond recovery without a heated garage. Many drivers rely on the UAZ Bukanka, known simply as the Loaf, a boxy Soviet-era vehicle often modified with double-pane windows and heavy insulation to withstand the cold. And did you know that to reach the center of this frozen hell, there is only one way? Route R504, also known as the Kolyma Highway. But local people do not use that name. They call it the Road of Bones. This 1,243-mile road was built during the darkest period of the Soviet Union, by order of Stalin. Millions of Gulag prisoners, criminals, intellectuals, and political enemies were sent here with pickaxes to break through the permafrost. They worked in temperatures as low as -58 degrees Fahrenheit. With little food and wearing tattered clothing, the rules were brutally harsh. If you died while working, there was no time to dig a grave in the frozen ground. The body was simply thrown onto the road and covered with gravel. As we travel along this icy, slippery road, keep this in mind. With every meter we move forward, we are driving over an unmarked cemetery. Today, this road is the only lifeline connecting the outside world to Yakutsk. And the golden rule for anyone driving here is simple: never travel alone. If your car breaks down on this road and no one passes by in the next 2 hours, you will not just be late. You will die. The cold will invade the cabin within minutes. The windows will freeze from the inside, and the blood will thicken. Death comes quietly and quickly. Along the road of bones lie the remnants of the Gulag system, ghost towns that once housed thousands of prisoners and guards. One of the most haunting is Kadykchan, a coal mining town built in the 1930s by Gulag labor. At its peak, over 10,000 people lived here, mining coal to power the Arkagalinskaya power station. When the Soviet Union collapsed, government subsidies dried up. In 1996, a massive explosion in the local coal mine killed 6 workers. That was the end. The government shut down operations and subsidized the relocation of residents. By 2010, Kadykchan was completely abandoned. What makes Kadykchan so eerie is how suddenly people left. Many families departed in a hurry, leaving behind personal belongings. Today, if you visit, you'll find apartment blocks where children's shoes still sit by coat pegs. Books are scattered across coffee tables, broken down cars rust in garages. The central town square features a crumbling statue of Lenin, overlooking empty playgrounds and shattered windows. The Mir mine is what happens when Siberia's emptiness meets industrial obsession, carved into the permafrost near the town of Mirny. This diamond mine isn't a hole so much as a man-made crater, more than a kilometer wide and plunging to nearly a kilometer deep. A circular wound etched into the taiga that's so vast it's been photographed from space. From the rim, the road spirals downward in tight loops like a concrete vine, descending past benches of exposed rock that read like layers in a cut-open planet. This is a kimberlite pipe, an ancient volcanic conduit that once blasted material from deep in the mantle toward the surface, leaving behind the diamond-bearing rock that made Mirny one of the Soviet Union's most valuable prizes. The scale creates its own physics. The pit generates powerful turbulence, and pilots have historically avoided flying directly over it because downdrafts can become unpredictable above the open void. But even a mine this enormous has a limit. By 2001, the surface pit was effectively exhausted, and the operation shifted underground, chasing the remaining ore through tunnels and shafts beneath the frozen ground. It's a strange Siberian contrast, a region defined by cold, silence, and distance, punctured by a single engineered abyss that proves how far humans will dig for a stone that fits on a fingertip. Kamchatka is Siberia's reminder that the cold is only half the story. This peninsula is nicknamed the Land of Fire, and it earns it. More than 300 volcanoes crowd the skyline here, with 29 still active, smoking, steaming, and occasionally rewriting the map. The most iconic is Kluchevskaya Sopka, a near-perfect cone that rises over 4,700 meters. So symmetrical it looks engineered rather than erupted. But the real spectacle happens where the ground stops pretending it's solid. In the Valley of Geysers, one of the largest geothermal fields on Earth. Boiling fountains burst from the riverbanks. Mud pots burp like breathing lungs. And mineral-stained cliffs drip with heat in a region better known for ice. just offshore. The Kuril Islands continue the same volcanic storyline in a long, jagged chain of 56 islands, each one a fragment of the Pacific Ring of Fire pushed above sea level. And hidden among them is one of the strangest nested landscapes on the planet. Lake Krenitsun on Wankotan Island, a volcano within a volcano. A glassy lake fills an ancient caldera, and from its center rises a steep, immaculate peak, an island mountain inside a lake inside a collapsed volcano, stacked like geological Russian dolls. The Lena Pillars, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that looks like it was designed by an architect rather than formed by nature. Along the banks of the Lena River, a spectacular belt of limestone formations rises 300 to 500 feet straight up from the water. These aren't just cliffs. They're vertical spires, columns, and towers that stretch for nearly 50 miles, creating a stone cathedral that has fascinated travelers since the 17th century. Here's what makes them scientifically remarkable. These pillars were formed during the Cambrian period, approximately 500 million years ago. Each column is essentially a vertical timeline recording the Cambrian explosion, the period when multicellular life suddenly diversified into most of the major animal groups we see today. Fossils of trilobites, ancient mollusks, and primitive algae are embedded throughout the rock, but the pillar's current shape comes from a process unique to Siberia called cryogenic weathering, or frozen ground karst. The extreme temperature fluctuations in this region, where summer can reach 95 degrees Fahrenheit and winter can drop to minus 76 degrees Fahrenheit, create a freeze-thaw cycle that literally shatters the limestone. Water seeps into cracks, freezes, expands, and breaks the rock apart. Over millennia, this process has widened the gullies between columns and isolated the pillars from one another, creating these impossible-looking formations. To the indigenous Yakut people, the Lena pillars aren't just geological formations. They're living entities and guardian spirits of the river. The area contains numerous traditional burial grounds and ancient petroglyphs, some depicting elk and human figures that are thousands of years old. The pillars remain a site of spiritual significance, where offerings are made to honor the spirits believed to inhabit the stones. Now, let's talk about Lake Baikal, because calling it just a lake is like calling the Grand Canyon just a ditch. Baikal is the deepest freshwater lake in the world, reaching 5,387 feet at its lowest point. It's also the oldest, with an estimated age of 25 million years. To put its volume in perspective, Lake Baikal contains approximately 20% of all the unfrozen freshwater on the entire planet. All 5 of the Great Lakes combined don't hold as much water as this single Siberian lake. Baikal sits in a rift zone where tectonic plates are actively pulling apart. The lake is literally getting wider, expanding by about 3/4 of an inch every year. This geological activity has created a unique ecosystem. Over 1,700 species of plants and animals live in and around Baikal, and roughly 2/3 of them exist nowhere else on Earth. The most famous of these unique species is the Nerpa, the world's only exclusively freshwater seal. Scientists still debate how these seals ended up in a landlocked lake hundreds of miles from any ocean. The leading theory suggests they migrated from the Arctic Ocean via ice-choked rivers during the Pleistocene epoch, then became isolated when the climate warmed and adapted completely to freshwater life over thousands of years. What's fascinating about the Nerpa is their adaptation to Baikal's extreme winters. The lake freezes over with ice that can be 6 feet thick. The seals maintain breathing holes through this ice by constantly scratching and abrading the surface with their claws and teeth. They give birth to their pups on the ice in late winter, and the baby seals are born with white fur that provides camouflage against the snow. The spiritual heart of Lake Baikal is Olkhon Island, the largest island on the lake and one of the most sacred sites in Siberian shamanism. For the local Buryat people, Olkhon is considered the dwelling place of powerful spirits. Cape Burkan, also known as Shaman Rock, is a white marble cliff covered in bright red lichens that features a through cave worshipped as the castle of the island's spirit master. Shamanic traditions on Olkhon remain vibrant. Travelers often stop at sacred sites to offer vodka, coins, or food. Neglecting these rituals is believed to anger the spirits and cause mechanical failures or accidents. Prayer ribbons in bright colors flutter from poles at sacred sites, and the sound of shamanic drums can still be heard during ceremonies. One of the most beloved legends of Baikal concerns the Angara River, the only river that flows out of the lake. The story goes that Angara was the beautiful daughter of the rich and powerful Baikal. She fell in love with Yenisei, a river to the west, and fled in the night to join him. In his rage, Baikal threw a massive rock to stop her. That rock became Shaman Rock, standing at the source of the Angara River, a permanent reminder of a father's anger and a daughter's defiance. But Siberia's geological paradoxes don't end with ancient limestone pillars and sacred lakes. In the Trans-Baikal region lies the Kara Sands, a 12-square-mile desert of golden sand dunes surrounded by larch forests, peat bogs, and the snow-capped Kodar Mountains. This wrong desert, as locals call it, looks like someone dropped a piece of the Sahara into the middle of Siberia. The dunes were formed during the last glacial period, approximately 20,000 to 100,000 years ago, when a glacier blocked the Kara River and created a massive glacial lake. The sand dunes, some reaching 260 feet in height, are the remains of the delta deposited in this ancient lake. When the glacier retreated and the lake drained, the sand was left behind, and wind has been sculpting it ever since. Standing on these dunes is surreal. In one direction, you see rolling sand that could be in North Africa. Turn around, and you're facing active glaciers and peaks covered in permanent snow. It's a landscape that shouldn't exist. A collision of desert and Arctic environments in the same visual frame. Siberia's south and coastal edge is where the myth of endless ice starts to crack. On Sakhalin Island, the landscape carries a visible memory of competing empires. Quiet streets where Japanese aerolines and details sit beside blunt Soviet blocks, as if 2 centuries are sharing the same fog. Far from the towns, explorers chase a more cinematic landmark, a Neva lighthouse, built by the Japanese in 1939 and anchored to a jagged rock outcrop off the southern coast. It rises like a solitary sentinel above the surf, battered by salt and wind, reachable only by boat when the sea allows it. And it feels less like a building than a warning etched into stone. Cross to the mainland and the story shifts to Vladivostok, Russia's Pacific gateway, and a city that faces east with purpose. Here, the coastline is engineered as much as it's admired, crowned by the Russky Bridge, an immense cable-stayed span that stretches across the water with the clean geometry of a ship's rigging, built on a scale that looks futuristic against the hills. And then comes the detail that surprises almost everyone: summer. When the season finally arrives, it doesn't whisper. It changes the color palette entirely. Along parts of the coast, beaches appear, and the water can warm to around 22 degrees Celsius, clear enough to show the seafloor, warm enough to swim. It's the Siberia no one expects. Not a frozen frontier, but a maritime edge where history, steel, and sunlight meet the Pacific. Equally bizarre is the Kyzylchin Valley in the Altai Mountains, known locally as Altai Mars. The hills here are painted in vibrant shades of red, yellow, orange, and purple, created by the oxidation of minerals like iron, manganese, and titanium. These colored layers were formed over 300 million years ago, when this area was the bottom of an ancient sea. Today, you can walk through this Martian landscape and find stones imprinted with the shells and algae of that prehistoric ocean. The colors shift throughout the day as the angle of sunlight changes, creating a constantly evolving palette. It's one of the few places on Earth where you can genuinely feel like you've stepped onto another planet without leaving our own. The Putarana Plateau sits above the Arctic Circle in northern central Siberia, and it's so isolated that even most Russians have never seen it. The plateau was formed 250 million years ago during one of the most catastrophic volcanic events in Earth's history. Massive eruptions flooded the region with layer upon layer of basalt lava, creating what geologists call trap formations. These are huge steps and terraces of hardened lava that give the plateau its distinctive appearance. The word Putarana itself comes from an indigenous term meaning mountains without peaks, and that's exactly what you see. Flat-top summits rising to 5,000 feet, their surfaces cut by deep canyons and fjord-like valleys. The plateau is often called the land of 10,000 lakes and 1,000 waterfalls. And those numbers aren't exaggerations. Water is everywhere. Glacial lakes fill the valleys. Their surfaces mirror smooth and impossibly blue. And because of the plateau's unique geology, with all those basalt steps and terraces, waterfalls cascade at every turn. The Kandinsky waterfall drops 354 feet, making it the highest waterfall in Russia. The Bolshoi-Irkandinsky Falls, though shorter at 89 feet, is wider and more powerful, sending up clouds of mist that create permanent rainbows in summer. Getting to the Putarana Plateau is an expedition in itself. There are no roads leading in. The only access is by helicopter, by boat during the brief summer when rivers are navigable, or by snowmobile in winter when everything freezes solid. This inaccessibility has preserved the plateau as one of the last true wildernesses. The wildlife of Siberia has evolved adaptations so extreme they border on the miraculous. Let's start with the Yakut horse, an animal that looks like it was designed by someone who didn't believe in the concept of shelter. These horses are biological tanks. They have coats so thick that snow accumulates on their backs without melting, proof that their body heat isn't escaping. In winter, their fur can grow to nearly 4 inches long, creating an insulation layer that traps warm air against their skin. But here's what's truly remarkable. Yakut horses don't just survive Siberian winters. They remain active and continue grazing even when temperatures drop to minus 76 degrees Fahrenheit. While other animals hibernate or migrate, these horses dig through snow up to 3 feet deep to reach the dried grass beneath. Their hooves are exceptionally hard, allowing them to break through ice-crusted snow. Their digestive systems are incredibly efficient, extracting maximum nutrition from the sparse, low-quality forage available in winter. The Yakut people have depended on these horses for over 4,000 years. The animals provide transportation, milk, meat, and even companionship in one of the harshest environments humans have ever inhabited. The relationship between the Yakut and their horses isn't just practical, it's deeply cultural, woven into songs, stories, and spiritual beliefs. Now let's talk about the apex predators, because Siberia is home to some of the most formidable carnivores on the planet. The Amur tiger, also called the Siberian tiger, is the largest cat in the world. Adult males can weigh up to 700 pounds and measure over 10 feet from nose to tail. These are animals built for power and endurance. Unlike tigers in tropical regions, the Amur tiger has adapted to extreme cold. Their fur is paler and less densely striped, providing better camouflage in snow-covered forests. They have a thick layer of fat, sometimes up to 2 inches deep, that acts as both insulation and an energy reserve during the long winters when prey is scarce. Their paws are exceptionally large, functioning as natural snowshoes that distribute their weight and allow them to move silently through deep snow while stalking prey. Amur tigers are solitary hunters with territories that can span up to 400 square miles. They need this much space because prey density in the Siberian taiga is naturally low. A single tiger might hunt only once or twice a week, but when they make a kill, they can consume up to 100 pounds of meat in a single feeding. They cache the remainder, covering it with snow and returning over several days until the carcass is completely consumed. To truly understand Siberia, we need to meet the people who have lived here, not for decades or centuries, but for over 1,000 years. The Nenets people inhabit the Yamal Peninsula, a name that translates to the edge of the world. And when you see this place, you understand why. It's a flat, treeless tundra that stretches to the horizon in every direction, locked in ice for most of the year. The Nenets are reindeer herders, and their entire way of life revolves around these animals. The reindeer provide everything: transportation across the snow, milk that's rich in fat and nutrients, meat and blood for food, hides for clothing and shelter, sinew for thread, bones for tools. Nothing is wasted. Every part of the animal serves a purpose. The traditional Nenets dwelling is called a chum, a conical tent made from a framework of long wooden poles covered with reindeer hides. In the center, a small fireplace provides heat and a means for cooking. The smoke rises through an opening at the top. The design is brilliantly simple and effective. The conical shape sheds wind and snow. The reindeer hide covering provides excellent insulation, and the entire structure can be dismantled, packed onto sleds, and moved in a matter of hours. Inside a chum, even when outside temperatures drop to minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit, the interior can remain relatively comfortable, hovering around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit near the fire. Families sleep on reindeer hides laid over a floor of birch branches, which provide insulation from the frozen ground. Children are bundled in layers of fur clothing, their faces barely visible. The Nenets' diet is almost entirely animal-based. Fresh reindeer blood, drunk warm immediately after slaughter, provides essential vitamins, particularly vitamin C, which prevents scurvy. Raw meat and fish supply nutrients that would be destroyed by cooking. Fermented fish and meat, buried in the permafrost for months, develop complex flavors and remain preserved indefinitely. There are no fruits, no vegetables, no grains. The Nenets have adapted to thrive on a diet that would be considered impossible by modern nutritional standards. But this ancient way of life now faces unprecedented threats. Climate change is altering the tundra in ways that disrupt traditional migration patterns. The permafrost is melting earlier in spring and freezing later in autumn, making river crossings dangerous and unpredictable. Warmer temperatures bring rain instead of snow, which then freezes into a hard crust that reindeer cannot dig through to reach the lichen they feed on. Entire herds have starved when unexpected rain created impenetrable ice layers over their grazing grounds. Simultaneously, the Yamal Peninsula sits atop some of the largest natural gas reserves on Earth. The region produces much of Russia's natural gas wealth, the black gold that fuels the economy. Massive pipelines cut across traditional migration routes. Drilling towers and industrial facilities fragment the tundra. The Nenets find themselves negotiating with energy companies, trying to preserve their way of life while the land beneath their feet is being transformed by extraction. The Siberian permafrost is more than just frozen ground. It's a time capsule, a biological archive preserving organic material for tens of thousands of years. In 2010, near the Laptov Sea, a perfectly preserved baby mammoth was discovered by a local hunter. She was named Yuka, and her remains were so well preserved that much of her soft tissue, including skin, muscle, and internal organs, was still recognizable. Yuka died approximately 40,000 years ago, yet she looked like she could have died yesterday. The permafrost has yielded other treasures. Woolly rhinoceroses with their distinctive horns intact, ancient horses with their last meals still visible in their stomachs, cave lion cubs so well preserved that their whiskers and claws remain flexible. Each discovery provides a window into ecosystems that vanished at the end of the last ice age. But there's a darker side to this frozen archive. As global temperatures rise and the permafrost thaws, ancient microorganisms sealed away for millennia are beginning to reawaken. Scientists have successfully revived viruses from the permafrost, including Pandoravirus yodoma, which remained infectious after nearly 50,000 years in the ice. The risk isn't just theoretical. In 2016, a heat wave in Siberia thawed the carcass of a reindeer that had died from anthrax 75 years earlier. The anthrax spores, perfectly preserved in the permafrost, became active again. A young boy died from the infection, and over 2,000 reindeer had to be culled to prevent a wider outbreak. It was a stark reminder that the permafrost doesn't just preserve curiosities for scientists, it preserves pathogens, and as it melts, those pathogens are returning to the surface. Siberia isn't just an empty wilderness of ice and forest. It is also one of the oldest and most historically layered borderlands on Earth, where cities rose, not despite the cold, but because of it. Tobolsk is where that story begins. Founded in 1587, it became the first capital of Siberia and the administrative heart of Russia's eastward expansion. Unlike most Siberian cities built of wood, Tobolsk stands apart for one striking reason: it is home to the region's only stone Kremlin. Rising above the Irtysh River, its white walls and towers were meant to project permanence in a land defined by extremes. History here took a darker turn in the early 20th century, when Tobolsk became the place of exile for the Romanov royal family. Before their execution, the last Tsar, Nicholas II, and his family lived under house arrest in the city, marking Tobolsk as a quiet witness to the collapse of Imperial Russia. Farther east, Siberia's story shifts from empire to motion. Novosibirsk, now the largest city in Siberia, didn't grow slowly over centuries. It exploded into existence at the end of the 19th century with the construction of the Trans-Siberian Railway. What began as a bridge crossing the Ob River became the unofficial capital of Siberia almost overnight. Today, Novosibirsk is the region's primary transport hub, a place where rail lines, roads, and air routes converge across thousands of miles of frozen territory. It is a city defined by movement, proof that Siberia has long been a crossroads rather than a dead end. And standing quietly between these worlds are the Ural Mountains. Older than the dinosaurs themselves, the Urals form one of the most ancient mountain ranges on the planet. They mark the natural boundary between European Russia and Asian Siberia, a line that is both geographical and symbolic. To cross the Urals is to leave one continent and enter another, without any dramatic change in scenery, only a sign by the roadside. For centuries, this invisible divide shaped trade, migration, and empire. In Siberia, even the borders are old and they still matter. What aspect of Siberia surprised you most? Was it the engineering required to build cities on permafrost? The dark history of the Road of Bones? The spiritual traditions that have survived into the modern age? Or maybe the biological adaptations of animals like the Yakut horse or the Nerpa seal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on this expedition to the coldest inhabited place on Earth. And if you found this deep dive into Siberia valuable, make sure you're subscribed to the channel